Okay, that's a great segue into talk to me about the market. How big is the market? Who are your clients? And then we will get into numbers because that's the really like the juicy part. I'm really curious.
Yeah, yeah, we like to leave the juice for the end.
Yeah,
But yeah, so look, huge market. Look, eventually the problem that we're solving is, it's happening every service transaction that's happening. Like, think about every communication to a vendor that is
yeah,
happening.
yeah.
It's like this is tapping into that.
So have you measured
But
how much transaction volume
yeah,
there
yeah.
is? Like,
Well, like on home services, it's like, there's between $1 trillion to $2 trillion every year that's happening in the US alone. But
wow,
but I'm saying that because like our focus is on residential property managers today.
right.
We could eventually get to that like huge number, and this is a big enough market for us, and the focus is really important because eventually you could like expand out, right? But like the thing is like how do you build it for the right first customer? And these customers are very desperate for the solution, which is what makes them the best right customer. But I would just say this, Cindy, that like I think I view the size of the markets different than like the transactional volume. I think you can make a lot of money from that transactional volume, but I think the real deal here is like the way to see markets in these true agentic AI solutions is like how much physical labor displacement there is. So like, you could be in a market where like maybe the transactions are 100 million only, but like if you are displacing $500 million worth of like jobs and salaries, and you can charge customers for that, then it's really creating a new market around like what the physical market and the salaries around that is, right? So uh, when you look at our market, we are eating out of three different markets. We're eating out of the software market because software is redundant for this work. Is if the AI is doing it. Why do you need software if the AI is doing it? Software is to organize it for humans, right? And then the second part that we're eating out of is the physical market, which is the labor market, which are like the million people that I said that are hired to do this job. With time, we're replacing those guys, and we think their salaries are redundant. We can eat out of that market, and eventually you can eat out of the vendor services market, which is really the transaction side. But this is how like an AI agent can go across all three markets together, and it can be a combined market, which is huge.
Okay, no, no, no. When you say displaced people, I'm assuming the labor market. I'm assuming you're referring to the AI agent can replace PMs, property managers. Is that right?
Today we're replacing virtual assistants
Oh, virtual. Okay. Yeah.
and which are helping the property managers. And I think in the future, I think there's a world where like the work that we're doing, which is basically what a property manager does, you can rely on AI to do this, which is cheaper, better, and more reliably, right?
Mm,
There still may be a need for, and there will be a need for a property manager for like some
yeah.
level of interaction. But we're talking about 1 million people that are hired to do this work. Like, what we're saying is a very big chunk of those guys are just not going to be able to compete with AI.
How many? A billion?
1 million people in
A
the
million? A
US,
million?
a
A
million
million people
people
in the US.
are hired to do this work. Yes,
A million in US. Okay.
1 million just in the US.
Wow. This is
So this is insane, right? Think
yeah,
about like
insane.
one in every 350, 400 people in the US are doing this work in some shape or form, right? And that's not including all the inefficiencies that are happening um, on the vendor side. Like the vendors also have to hire a bunch of people in their front office to, the back and forth that we're talking about and the miscommunication not only just happens for the buyer, but it happens for the seller too. So the vendors are like talking back and forth. This is why this is such a prime industry because it's very untapped and
Yeah.
it's very backwards and inefficient, right? And software tried to like improve these things, and it did. But really, the biggest bottleneck that software had was like that it organized the workflow, but because there was so much context, it wasn't able to fully automate it. Now the AI can automate it without necessarily having to like organize it, and so because it can act like a human. And the second problem that the software companies had was like they didn't get a lot of adoption, right? So even my last company where we built software for vendors, like people would buy it, but the adoption was really low because this market works on email, text, and phone calls, right? And they don't want to adapt new software. But like, the AI with an AI, you don't have to do that. The AI talks to you as if it's a human, so it's able to do email, phone, text messages, whatever you want, right? So this is the big revolution here, where it's like, software is going to become less redundant, and the robots that are able to do the work are going to be more relevant.
Wow, that's big vision. That's big vision. That's pretty bold. Okay.